I am share something with you. I had a student that came to our training program in Porto Velho, Brazil. So I work with YWAM, and we are having our linguistic training. And we decided to start. I did my training with SIL in Brazil, and I was helping teaching SIL courses in Brazil when I felt that God spoke to me that we have to start our training in YWAM. Why are we doing that? And one of the reasons was because the people we were receiving at that time, they were coming to YWAM to be missionaries in Brazil, most of them had very little education. They had very little training and formal education, so we wanted to design something for those people. Then in 90, we had a student that came. His name was Mimica. Mimica was sparkling, talkative, that Brazilian that, fills the place with his presence and with his jokes. And so he came and he wanted to be a Bible translator, And he was a storyteller from Northeast, a very poor area in Northeast of Brazil. And he had only done only third grade, so 3 years of formal education. He's never gone to high school. So he was from that very poor and simple area, but I could tell he was smart. He was really smart. He was a storyteller. People would pay him at the parties to tell stories, But so we started training, the linguistic training, traditional phonetics, phonology, analysis, and he wasn't doing well. He was not doing well. He would get 30% most in all the activities and assignments. And I saw him crying many times because he would say, God is calling me to do this. I want to translate the Bible. But he could hardly write well in Portuguese. He couldn't spell the words right. But it was so clear to me that he was bright, he was smart, he was capable. He just couldn't do school things, So it was very difficult, the 3 months of the training, the basic training, and a lot of teachers were wondering, should we take him, let him go to the tribe? He would never be able to learn the language, He doesn't even speak Portuguese right. Yes. Okay, in the end of the program, we had 1 week of a practice that we bring some indigenous from different tribes, and the students would have a 1 week experience learning languages. Guess who was the best? Mimica. Mimica was just, everyone was, and the language was given to him, so it was one of the hardest languages that, most SIL linguists there would say, this is a very difficult language. It's Makuna Dub. And he was talking. The Indians were so happy. There was 2 Indians with him because he was so happy, and he was talking, and he was trying, and he was speaking the language. His pronunciation was perfect. He did really well in the phonetics classes. really bad. But the pronunciation was perfect. When he was actually learning a language, relating to people, there was something in his brain that worked, but didn't work in the classroom. Okay? So then he was sent to a tribe, Sanuma, one of the Yanomami tribes. And he's been there since then. 28 years. 28 years. Mimica learned the language in a way that no one else there learned. Okay, he learned the Sanuma language, and he learned the Wazamo language. Wazamo is a specific language the Sanuma use when they want to communicate something that's really important, okay? Something that's serious. They don't use the normal everyday language. They use the Wazamo language. And Wazamo is a language, but it's also, it's more than a language, it's also a performance. It's a way of communicating something that's important, okay? So I'll show you, he sent me this video just a couple of weeks ago. So I want you to try to guess what he's doing here. Mimika is the one on this side, okay? The other is the chief of the village.
Terminar, bate palma. Bate palma, terminar. Não, bate palma.
What do you think he's doing there? It looks different. You know, this guy's the chief of the tribe, and his wife is very sick and needs to be taken to the city by helicopter for surgery, otherwise she'll die. And the chief is so scared that he wouldn't let his wife go because he was afraid something would happen in the helicopter, something. It was too dangerous for him. It was worse than seeing her die, to let her get in the helicopter and go to the city. And then Mimika was convincing him, was just telling him, it's okay. She'll survive. I, rode helicopters many times in my life and nothing happened. And they were like discussing, and he was comforting him using the Wazamo language. Okay? So this is the way to communicate something that's really important, that's really from your heart, and that's vital, that it's, So that's the way to communicate in that tribe. And Mimika can do that. He learned that. After 20-something years there, he learned how to communicate things that are really important. It's more than just learning the language well. He learned the language really well, but he learned the language, the sacred language, the language that's used for, so it's not just the words, but it's the way you talk. So it's like a challenge, and people are in there arguing, and they are convincing, so it's just amazing what he did. And he did convince the chief, and his wife went to the city and got the treatment and got back home, and everything went well. But Mimika was discipling, he had the people that he had 12 men. He said it wasn't on purpose, the number, but that's what happened, 12 men that he had been discipling and teaching for almost 10 years. And he would be going with those men to different places and, and just doing life together. And now they are communicating the gospel, these guys, These guys are sharing the gospel, and you can see. They're also using the Wazamo language because they try to preach the way they saw the whites preaching, just standing there and doing what I'm doing here. Boring. There's no power, And then they figure out that's how you preach. You need to have two people, and it's a challenge. You're talking, you are asking questions, you're answering the questions. And then it starts a revival in the tribe. So there's a lot of people coming to Jesus because they figure out the way to communicate. So Mimika was responding to God, what God told him to do. When it looked impossible, he was rejected by missions. He was rejected by a lot of people. You don't have education. It's not for you. Now he's working with his team of Sanuma, and they want to start translating the Old Testament orally, using Wazamo. That's what they want to do. And they're ready, and they writing to us, how do we teach us, how do we do that? And I said, we don't know yet. We are learning how to do it together. But it's just beautiful for me to see that Mimika was faithful to his calling when, everyone thought he wasn't capable of doing it, and he did because he believed that God was speaking to him. My husband and I, we worked for many years with the Suruaha tribe in the Amazon. It's another tribe. It's a small tribe, deep in the jungle. I just let these, pictures, roll as I talk because I want you to get a feeling of what the place is and what I'm talking about, just to give you some context, okay? So this is an isolated tribe in the middle of the jungle. The first contact with the outside world was with one of our teams. They had no idea there was people outside. They knew that maybe there was some people, but not many, some survivors. And when we first got to them, they thought we couldn't say, okay, we're missionaries, we're Bible translators, we came here because we want to learn your language, and we want to translate the Bible into your language. They had never seen a book. They knew nothing about the outside world. That's Smiley husband. And they had no idea about anything, and you know why they let us in? They thought we were so poor, so miserable. They said, we have to help these people, let us feed them, let us teach them something. They don't know anything. The first word I learned in Suruaha was danuz. Danuz. I heard it so many times the first few days, and then I realized it means stupid. It's just, they would say it all the time because I was just so stupid. I didn't know anything. They had no idea of how I had survived so long, not knowing anything about life or anything about anything, So we had to learn how to do life there. There was no way to take with us our comfort, food, or anything. We had to go by boat many days and then walk in the jungle many days. So we had to learn everything. We couldn't take anything to bring us some comfort or some. So I had to just learn how to live and how to speak a language. It was my first experience learning a language monolingually. I had learned languages before that, but learn a language where there is no translation, where there is no bridge, where there's no, and the context is totally different, So it was an adventure to learn that language, and it was difficult. It was difficult, and to learn the culture and to learn everything. But the point is, after several years, we felt we were ready to start communicating the gospel and start, getting ready for translation. But we couldn't. Somehow we felt it wasn't right, or anything that we said it would be inadequate. There was just a sense of inadequate, not right. We had learned the language. We found some analogies of redemption that we could use. We knew they need Jesus. There was a lot of suicide, All Suruaha believe that the best way to leave this world is by suicide. 80% of them kill themselves, There's very rare someone will die of a natural cause. So there was this depression, there was everything, and we knew the language and we wanted to start. But we just felt God saying, not yet. You're not ready. They're not ready. But Lord, it's been 7 years, 10 years. And God was just saying no, no. And we kind of get what God was saying because it was, we had learned the script. We knew what we had to do. So we had learned the language, we had analyzed the language, we had created an alphabet, we had primer books ready. We even taught some of the kids, and they're so smart, they learned it like that. But when they realize what we are doing, they say, no, why are you doing that? That's ridiculous. Why don't you just say things? Why do you have to do this game of putting codes and then you decode? Just say it, We couldn't even use that excuse of, you can write letters to people. Why? Everyone lives in the same house. Just say what you want, There was no way to convince them there was any point in learning how to read and write. It wasn't difficult to them, It just didn't see any point. And so our script was kind of, okay, so what we do if they don't want to learn how to read and write, so we translate the Bible and they're not going to read it because everyone will be illiterate. Then we start questioning and thinking, does God need them to learn how to decode those little signs in order to speak to them? Of course not. There's no need for them to learn how. God doesn't depend on a book, on a technology that's learning how to decode. God is God. He can talk to anyone the way he wants. So we say, okay, so we're not teaching them how to read and write. So then what we do, God? And God starts saying, okay, just serve them. Help them. But help in what? I mean, they know everything. They don't need us to teach them anything. They know everything they need for this environment. So what are you going to teach them? Teach them hygienists. Well, they're healthier, much healthier than people in the city. Why do they need hygienists? So God was saying, just help them with practical things. Help them to carry firewood. Help them to bring water to the house. Help them to bathe the kids. So for years, that's just what we are doing, trying to help them with very practical things. And my husband, he would go to the jungle and he would pray and cry and pray and pray and, cry to the Lord. And the Indians would ask, who are you talking to? And he would say, Joshua, Jesus, okay? He would just say Jesus. So they knew there was this Jesus that we talked to sometimes, but they knew nothing about Jesus, okay? And sometimes we would pray, and they would know that we were praying to Jesus. That's all they knew. We didn't give any detail. So we were waiting that God would speak to them, that something would happen that would make it make sense for them so that we could start. So this was almost 10 years, okay? And then God did speak to the witch doctor. He was going to the poison they take, it's a plant that they believe that plant actually it represents the spirit of death. So when they eat that plant, it's a sacrifice. Okay, so it's not just a suicide because you are frustrated or unhappy, but it's a sacrifice. You're giving your life to that spirit. And they believe they have to do this. So this witch doctor one day, he was running into the jungle he was so depressed, he wanted to get the poison and he wanted to eat. And they believe if they take the poison, they go to heaven. Heaven is a place where everyone who takes the poison goes. And all your relatives are there. All your ancestors are there. So that's where you want to go. And it's eternal punishment. But it's where you want to go. Okay? So he was running there, and when he got to the tree, he saw this powerful man standing. And the man was all painted red, as you saw some people, they're all painted red from here to totally red. And he looked at him, and he said, Asha azamuni sa hamunasamo yamaruha. That was just what Jesus said. Don't follow your daughter. Stay here. Because his daughter had committed suicide. So he said, yes. He walked back to the village and he said all the anger, all the pain and the bitterness, everything that he had, it just disappeared when that man talked to him. And then he called us and he said, I saw Joshua. I saw Joshua. And we were, how? He said, yes, I did. I saw, when you're waiting for 10 years, and nothing happens. And he goes, I saw Joshua. And he's wonderful. You're right. He's wonderful. And then my husband I was all excited. He saw Joshua, and my husband, how do you know it was Joshua? And he said, I know. His eyes were powerful, like fire. And the way he looked at me, it just made me, put me in peace. And his tongue was powerful and at the same time sweet like honey. His voice, he was talking about his voice, was sweet like honey. And we go, it sounds like Jesus, And my husband, how did he look like? Well, he goes, of course, he looked short hair, cut like this, all painted red, wearing the sukwadu. Of course, how do you think Jesus will look like, And Jesus changed his life, because we were, how do you know? It's Jesus. It's like, I mean, there's no church. He can't start going to church, change the way he dress or stop smoking. These kind of things that we see outside that kind, give us, okay, this person is now following Jesus. No, there was nothing like that. But his life changed. So I have to fast forward here. And so things start happening, and people start being touched and transformed by Jesus. And a lot of things, people have encounters. They go into the river or to the jungle, and they would sing for hours and hours and hours, and they would come back and tell us, Jesus was singing with me. I heard his voice. He was singing with me in the jungle. There was one night, I remember that they came and wake me up at 3 o'clock in the morning. Listen, Jesus is talking. Jesus, it's Jesus. And I go, 3 o'clock, it's Jesus. And I, okay. And I went, to sleep again. And in the morning, they were, oh, guys, you didn't even wake up to listen to Jesus. Jesus was talking, and it was beautiful. And he was singing, and everyone heard. Everyone heard. And Jesus is with us. So there was a lot of things happen. So we got, okay, so maybe now is the time to start translating. And we had decided we are not going to do written, so it has to be oral. There was no one talking about oral Bible translation at that time. We are not doing a lot of reflection or, theory. We just said, well, they don't want to read, so it's going to be oral. So we start developing our own strategies on how to do it. So you get someone, start with Genesis, because that's what they wanted. That was right in the moment, we would start with Genesis. So we would get a good storyteller, and we would tell the story. And then this guy would tell it back to us. And then we would, okay, so you missed this point and this point. Then he would tell. So when he was ready, we would get someone else that never heard this story, and he would tell this story to the other group, the other person. And then we would go in the process in cycles, nothing complicated, just go in cycles and perfecting it. And, and then we had a story. So we had the first recording was Genesis and some parts of the Old Testament that point to Jesus. So we felt we were ready, and we wanted to show it to one of the Indians. So that's why I'm asking about how you respond to God when he speaks to you. So we had this guy, Ikiji. He came to our place, and we told him, we have something we want you to hear. So we put it there. So it was in the mini disc. And then he heard. It was a 40, 50 minutes recording of Genesis. Then we are expecting he would do something or ask something. He just asked a few questions and, okay, and walked away to the jungle. And you go, You invest so much time and so much work. It doesn't seem like it impressed him at all. He was in the jungle for hours. Late in the night, he came back. And then he asked, can you record something? And said, okay. So we gave him the mini disc. And he lay down in his hammock, and he started singing. He was singing the most beautiful songs we had ever heard. It was beautiful. So he recorded 11 or 12 songs, hymns of adoration. He was retelling everything he heard in a beautiful way, in a poetic, symbolic. It was just so amazing. The hymns were like, we would never be able to translate, anything like they did. It was things that were so deep and so symbolic and so poetic. Like one of the hymns would say, there is a river, there's this beautiful river, and the angels are paddling in that river. And the angels are going that beautiful canoe, and the feathers on the ears as they paddle, the music of the paddling in the water, and the feathers dancing, and they are worshiping Jesus. And they are in that river. That's the river of life. So it was all symbolic. It was all beautiful. And in some of the hymns, they were actually talking about very, very significant theological concepts that I'd never think they would get that from Genesis. About the redemption, about the atonement, even atonement. They were singing about it. So God really did something just by them, hearing the word in their language. The sad thing is that when we came to the city, we were so excited about what happened and their response. And then they were singing. Everyone in the village was singing the songs. And the Suruaha, they always, every time you hear a song, when you sing that song, you have to put your own words. You don't sing it exactly as you heard it, because that song belongs to that person. When you sing, it's your song. So that's how they respond. You have to compose a song, and the song is yours and brings your heart. And that's how you share. So everyone was singing those songs in all those different ways, with all different shades of communicating the love and the grace of God and forgiveness and life after death, and all. So beautiful things happened. But what was sad is that when we came to the city and we started sharing with people what happened, we were just saying the Bible translation. We translated the book of Genesis. But people are saying, no, that's not translation. It cannot be translation. It has to be written. It's too dangerous. It's not the word of God. So at that point, that's 18 years ago, okay? So at that point, it was creating so much division that we decided, okay, we're not talking about it anymore. We're not talking about it. We'll keep doing it. We believe God is doing something, but we're not talking because we don't want to create, division and problems. But now, it's the time. Now is the time. So that's the way the Suruaha are responding to the love of God in their own ways. Okay, there was an anthropologist who was accusing us of changing the culture, and they went there. And they were there for a week, and they came back, and they said, no, they're not evangelizing. There's no church. There's nothing there. So, oh, yes. The Indians were even trying to evangelize them, but they couldn't understand the language. Yeah. So that's their way to respond to the love of God. And they know today they don't have to commit suicide. They know that they deserve the eternal punishment, but they have Jesus. Jesus died for them. So that's the beginning.